Hi everyone, this is our second lecture for the week. Uh, this time we are talking about trends in families, more specifically American families. So let's talk about families and the life course. So we like to think that we had childhoods just like our siblings, but in reality, children's experiences are shaped by family size, birth order, presence or absence of parents, socioeconomic status, and other sociological variables. Also, your culture, be it the time and place, can dramatically change what kind of family experience you had. So, my growing up in Western Pennsylvania in the 1980s and 90s was, in all likelihood, very different than your childhood you had growing up. Similarly, I was born 5 years before my brother, and so I was in a very different family unit than he had when he was that same age. And he lived with my family for 8 years after I went off to college. So he had a very different family unit during that time. There are all kinds of factors that dictate what our childhoods look like. Life expectancy is increasing in the United States, and about 10% of the elderly, though, now live below the poverty line. That poverty line we talked about when we talked about social class. Care of the elderly, and this isn't really anything new, is no longer a primary function of the family. Over 40% of senior citizens will now spend some time in a nursing home. With that said, most senior citizens spend anywhere from uh, 1 to 4 years in that nursing home. It doesn't tend to be very long because, unfortunately, when people go into nursing homes, it is because their health is starting to fail them, and so they don't necessarily live in that place for too long before they die. Um, Domestic violence is something faced by families. Domestic violence is by far the most common form of uh, family violence, and it really is up there in terms of violence in the United States overall. Domestic violence includes behaviors abusers use to gain and maintain power over their victims. Abuse can take the form of physical, of course, that's the kind we most often think of, but it can also be verbal. It can look like someone telling you that you're stupid, that you're dumb, that you don't mean anything. It can be financial. So if your partner would keep you from having access to money. Now, with that said, many couples have financial arrangements, right? Bills get paid every month in my house, and I don't really know what's happening because my wife is more the money-minded person. And when she tells me to pay a bill, I pay a bill. But what financial domestic violence looks like is, say, one partner's keeping all of the money and giving the other partner like $10 a week to spend, right? An amount of money that doesn't do any of the things that an adult could be able to do. Sexual violence, of course, it goes without saying, and I hate to have to say this, but I've corrected students before. Um, Domestic living partners and husbands can rape their wives. Wives can rape their husbands, and it absolutely exists, unfortunately. And it is a form of domestic violence, and also psychological violence. This often takes the form of that looks like the other forms of violence, but things like gaslighting your partner, making them feel like they're going crazy, moving things without telling them, uh, throwing away things without telling them. These can also be forms of domestic violence. Now, this cycle of violence and abusive relationships we're talking about on this slide is largely related to physical violence. But with that said, it could relate to other forms of violence. Stage one of the domestic violence cycle, the relationship appears normal. And in stage two, the victim feels like they're, quote, walking on eggshells to avoid arguments. Now, most relationships do have their times between fluctuating between stage 1 and stage 2, and there's not typically much room for concern. Now, when stage 3 happens, then that is when things become serious. Stage 3 is highlighted by acute battering and violence, lasting for seconds. It could be a quick hit, hours, or even days. And in stage 3, the abuser blames their victim for what they did. They say things like, "Why do you make me do this? I'm doing this because you're making me do this," that kind of thing. And then in stage 4, the abuser will apologize profusely and promise that it will never happen again. And that is absolutely predictable. Now, unfortunately, um, numerous studies have shown, and all social workers are aware of this, um, if the cycle starts, if you ever hit stage 3, um, statistically, chances are uh, it will not end. These cycles will continue. So after stage 4, it'll go back to stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, getting worse and worse and worse until the victim either leaves the situation or is killed. So if you or anyone you know is in a situation like this, you really need to get out. And I the college does provide resources for those, and I will look into actually posting those on Blackboard. Rates of domestic violence are about equal across racial and ethnic groups. There is no one racial or ethnic group, no one sexual orientation or religious group that abuses each other more or less often. People are more likely to be killed or attacked by family members more than anyone else. This is for a variety of reasons. One of the biggest being these are the people that you see the most, so the people most likely to hurt you. Domestic violence is also a problem in the LGBT community. Um, Often we don't think of same-sex couples as being those in which domestic violence occurs, but it absolutely does. And while the rates of domestic violence are no different in the LGBT community, what can make the violence worse is that often police officers or outside observers don't take it as seriously when, say, two men get in a fist fight or when two women get in a fist fight. But if those people live in the same house and they sleep in the same place, that can absolutely become very, very dangerous. Children and the elderly also suffer at the hands of abusive family members. Child and elder abuse are likely to go underreported. That is in part because of the powerlessness of the victims. Very small children, very old or very sick family members could be unable to get out of the house to get help. Additionally, children and also the elderly may also suffer from neglect. This is when a caregiver fails to give adequate nutrition, sufficient clothing or shelter, or clean or safe living conditions to those that can't get them for themselves. We see neglect among the elderly, we see neglect among children, and it is quite grotesque and just as serious as other forms of abuse. Another form of child abuse is incest. Incest is defined as sexual contact between family members, and incest becomes a form of child abuse when it occurs between a child and a caregiver. So if a babysitter or a much older sibling uh, has sexual relations with a sibling, that becomes child abuse. If it is between two siblings of equal intellect and of the same age, that is still that is still a problem, but it is not child abuse. So social workers or outside observers would deal with it with a different set of therapeutic tools. Elder abuse can also include violence and abuse as well as financial exploitation. So often, grown children will just start taking things from their aged family members because they think they're rightfully theirs. Well, that person hasn't died yet, so unless they gave it to you, it is still theirs. Theft, neglect, as I mentioned, and abandonment. So just not going to see them ever, and that can kill somebody. As of March 2002, and this does need to be updated, but actually this phenomena hasn't changed all that much since then. As of March 2002, the U.S. Census reported more than 123 million people were married, while about 21 million people were divorced. Research indicates that about 50% of all first marriages now end in divorce, and most who divorce remarry. Now you will notice 123 is a whole lot more than 21 million, right? So that really speaks to that 50% of all first marriages end in divorce. So we talk about first marriages, we talk about marriage, 50% marriage ends in divorce. That's not an accurate statement. First marriages end in divorce. Second marriages, if it happens, third marriages are more likely to work. And part of that is because of the maturity of the individuals. Part of that is some people that get divorced don't ever want to get married again. So if you are married, if you're going to get married, don't worry so much about divorce. It is overstated. Now, if you are divorced, but you decide to get married again, also, that marriage is statistically more likely to work out for what it's worth. Every situation is different. Here we have a really interesting graph about divorce rate over the past century. Many of the divorces, and when we focus on so many more people getting divorced now than they used to, we talk about that time between 1970 and 1995, right? Because a lot that really shook up society between 1970 and more like 1990, right? Everyone thought, oh, the family structure is falling apart, everyone's getting divorced. Well, in reality, since now that spike was caused by a dramatic change in both divorce laws and the social acceptability of women being allowed to divorce their husbands and being able to get out of abusive situations. Now you've noticed since that about early 90s stage, it has equalized and gone down dramatically. That is likely because a lot of people who were in bad marriages got out, and now we are at about that. What is it? Annual divorce rate? That, yeah, 16 out of every 1,000 marriages for the annual divorce rate. You'll also note in the mid 1940s there was a dramatic spike in the divorce rate. That is from soldiers coming home from World War II in all likelihood, and either something happened to those soldiers during the war, or they maybe got married and weren't really ready to get married at that point. So there was, yeah, that divorce rate in the 1940s often goes underlooked. So now let's talk about trends in American families. The American family is changing. About 5% of all households are occupied by couples who are cohabitating. These are people living together as romantically involved, unmarried people. If you, now that's 5% of all American households, if you were to take people between the ages of 18 and 30, I would say that that 5% would be dramatically higher. I have had students muse that it's anywhere, it's more like 25%, and that could be accurate. Increases have also occurred in numbers of single people, i.e. people choosing to stay single, right? Not dating, just choosing to stay alone. People who are cohabitating. Parents who are choosing to raise their children, again, on their own, not wanting to get remarried. And people living in intentional communities. So these could take the look of the now somewhat traditional hippie commune, or it could be multiple families living in one big house and acting as one family unit. Families adapting to challenges of postmodern society may create family structures that look very different from our, quote, traditional family. These sometimes do include ex-spouses, new partners and children, other kin, and even non-kin such as friends and co-workers. And also, this could look like uh, households over multiple houses, right? I've known people personally that they are two married couples and they live next door to each other and they just walk in and out of each other's houses and they raise their children as if that uh, they were their own children. Okay, this week we have our discussion as usual and our short essay. The discussion is going to be talking about how family structures looked for you when you were younger and reflecting a little bit on that. And we also have our short essay. So if you have any questions in those regards, if it's not real clear on Blackboard, please let me know and I will talk to you soon.